Hello everybody, today I want to talk about failure and why I believe it's not actually a good indicator of success. So failure has been on my mind a lot today because I've just had some major technical issues this week with my computer hardware. That means I have lost quite a bit of data and I'm not able to access quite a bit more. And if you've seen my podcast, you'll know that this isn't even the first time that this has happened to me recently. If you know me personally, you'll also know that I probably won't learn from this. But here we are. I feel like I've failed a little bit because I made a goal for myself that I'd get a video out every single week. And this has kind of come along and screwed it up. I had a bunch of things ready to go and now I can't get to it. So I want to talk about failure, specifically stuff that maybe I would have talked about a little bit later down the line, but for today, please enjoy this very unedited video of my long rant. So let's get into what I mean by this. When it comes to seeing people succeed and successful people, everybody's familiar with that saying that, the successful person has failed more than the unsuccessful person even tried. And you also hear all of these stories about successful people that, had to fail so many times in a row before they saw any success. So I think like Sylvester Stallone trying to hand out his Rocky screenplay to people, had to do it a staggering number of times. In the sports world where we might be more interested, I don't know if I'll get the quote right. I think it was Michael Jordan saying that the interesting thing wasn't about how many successful shots he took. He actually took way more unsuccessful shots. What was interesting and what made him great was the amount of times he tried. Let me know if I've got that wrong. Maybe it wasn't him, maybe that's not what he said, but you get the idea of where I'm coming from. You hear this over and over that the only way you can succeed is through failing hundreds and hundreds of times. And I have a bit of a problem with that because I don't actually think when you look at how the brain is wired up, that makes a whole lot of sense. The brain is designed to conserve energy, and so anytime you're not succeeding at something, a healthy brain should actually start steering you away from that behavior. It should start saying, you know what, you're probably not wired up for this. You should try something that you might be better at. And when you watch kids and how kids learn, it very much is like that. They'll see something, they'll try it maybe 3 or 4 times. If they don't get a bit of a knack for what's going on, they will lose interest, they'll go and do something else. In adults, personally, when I've been teaching, I see the exact same thing happening. So I don't think this is restricted just to kids, but adults also have this kind of narrative subscribed to them that, you're not trying hard enough, and if you just suffered through it a bit longer, you would be more likely to be successful. And so I think it muddies the waters a little bit. But basically what I wanted to say was that I find a better predictor of whether somebody is successful through all the sports people I've worked with on skill development or injuries, or even the business professionals that I've worked with in my time. The better predictor of who is going to be successful is who has spent more time in the zone of almost succeeding. So it doesn't have to be an actual success and it doesn't have to be a failure. Anyone who gets to the point where they're almost about to succeed and stays in that spot for the longest tends to get furthest quicker, and I would argue in a more healthy way than the people who are, just letting every single massive failure wash over them and trying no matter what. So let's talk a little bit about why that might be. The easiest way to explain it would be through a molecule called dopamine. So you've probably heard of dopamine from like screen addictions and stuff. They say that when we use our phones too much, it depletes all the dopamine reserves in our body. If you're older like me and you've been looking into psychological stuff for a long time, dopamine was the big thing with addiction. You know, if you're addicted to alcohol, drugs, whatever, dopamine is going crazy in your body, and that's the thing that makes you addicted. Well, dopamine, I think, is better to be understood in terms of what it actually does for your body in a healthy way, because we can't actually function without dopamine at all. So dopamine is essentially your molecule for motivation. If you want to get out of bed, or if you want to break a world record, like anything within that spectrum, you need a certain amount of dopamine to come into your system that tells the brain to kind of energize you, wake you up, get you more alert, focused, paying attention, so that you can go and do the things that you want to do. And the way that dopamine gets released in the body, apart from like a few different natural cycles when it comes to like circadian rhythms and things, you get the biggest spikes of dopamine when you almost succeed in a task. So as an example, I'll take juggling. If I try to teach somebody how to juggle and they throw a ball, and once they throw the ball, they get scared because there's stuff in the air and they just kind of freeze up, ball hits the ground, not very much goes on there, and those people usually lose interest very, very quickly. Or even if they throw the ball and they just can't reach out anywhere near the right place to grab it, again, they don't stay very invested, they don't stay very interested. The people, however, who catch the ball, or who almost catch the ball, so maybe it hits off their hand and then hits the floor, as soon as that happens, you see that person light up, you see their posture change, you see their face change, and you can tell that something has changed inside of them, and they start really, really wanting to be good at this skill. If they catch the ball, you will maybe see the same thing happen. If they catch the ball but they almost didn't, you again see the face light up, you see the posture change, all of that stuff. The more in that realm of kind of the zone of success, whether you actually do succeed in the end or whether you fail, the more time you spend in there, the more your brain starts giving you things like focus, coordination, better posture. It wakes up your memory systems. It just does all the good stuff for you to ensure that you complete a task. Same goes when you're trying to learn a Rubik's Cube for the first time. You know, you learn the algorithms, you're trying to do it without your memory. Which one would make you do it more? If you forget the algorithm and then you try something and then the cube is just completely scrambled, or if you forget the algorithm and you try something and you can see that you only got one turn wrong, it's almost where it should be, but it's not quite. The second example usually makes people go like, oh man, I was so close. Okay, I got to do this again. So that's kind of how it works for a beginner. The question then is, does this translate to like world-class individuals? And I would argue that yes, it does. So while everybody loves to sell the story of like, you know, the Michael Jordan missing more times and having this crazy work ethic that means he's working harder than everybody else and kind of suffering through it more than everybody else, you also have to remember that there are so many more athletes at a similar level of ability. Maybe they didn't end up being the very greatest, but at a super high level, you've got tons of people who made their way into that area in different ways. So some of them did the same thing. They suffered through and they pushed through, you know, all the negativity, all the failure until they got where they wanted to be. A lot more of them found that they were kind of good at it already and sort of just coasted through. And then when things got more difficult, again, if you look at every stage where, you know, somebody jumps up from like semi-pro to pro or college to professional, whatever, the ones who failed hard tend to be the ones who drop out. If you are used to being in that zone of almost succeeding and you can just keep that going, you actually see your progress just ramp up and up and up. And that has been my experience with most of the athletes that I've worked with. I've been lucky enough that as a gymnastics coach, starting more than 20 years ago, I've got a decent sample of like the kids and gymnasts that I saw who have since made it to like world champion status or made the Olympics, as well as ones who maybe didn't make it to the top of gymnastics, but now have become an adult and they're very successful, whether it's through physical movement or some other endeavor. I could maybe count one or two of them that really weren't that good and that really pushed themselves through all the stress and fatigue and failure and still made it to the top. I can tell you 20, 30, 40 more that have become very successful, but they started out kind of talented, and again, they just spent more time in that realm of being almost successful. So not too good. They weren't wiping the floor with anybody else. That probably would lead to them being disinterested after a while. But in that nice little middle zone is pretty much the sweet spot. So that's the almost succeeding part. What about the failure part then? What is it about that? Is there something in failure that also leads people to be successful? It would seem to me, when you look at the people who deal with the most failure and the biggest failures and the failures that take the strongest emotional toll, as I said before, most people will just kind of drop out when it comes to that. They won't be able to tolerate it. The people that can tolerate it, usually when you look at the rest of their lives outside the thing that they are successful in, you usually find quite a bit of turmoil going on. So when you look at those like really famous success stories and then look at personal life, relationships, all of that kind of stuff, very often you're going to find a whole world of chaos. And I think that those two things are probably related. So when you have these guys that are somehow able to just switch off that deterrence to failure, I think usually you find something developmentally in their childhood, in their life, that made it so that failing wasn't an option for them, and they're not actually necessarily doing these things for positive reasons or for psychologically healthy reasons. They're usually doing these things out of like fear or a need to achieve success. And while that might help you get to the very top of where you want to be, I don't think it leads to a very fulfilling life. And I think that's the real issue I have of peddling that as the way to get to the top. It's not a guarantee that you're going to get there. It also doesn't lead to happiness, let's say, when you arrive there either. So with that in mind, how would we implement this when it comes to Speedcubing? It kind of sounds easy when you're like, okay, well, make everything within an appropriate realm of difficulty. That can be easier said than done. So when it comes to like, I'm going to learn all of ZBLL, how are you going to do that without failing constantly for a very long time? You need to figure out how you can break these big chunks of information that you need to master and accomplish into much, much smaller layers. And you probably need to get really good at thinking about cost-benefit analysis. So while ZBLL might lead you to be a really top world-class cuber in 5 years' time, is it the best thing for you right now? Will it actually lead you to some degree of success in the short term? And if not, then you got to decide, all right, well, what about this am I going to keep? Do I throw it away altogether, and do I actually get better at inspection or get better at something like keyhole, where you could realistically use those in every couple of solves, and start picking apart where is your learning actually getting you. You should be able to see some sort of evidence for your success in the short term as well as the long term. Otherwise, you're going to start moving into that more psychologically unhealthy realm. The second aspect of this is also going to be around competition. So one of the big problems with competition, and we'll talk about my thoughts on, you know, whether we should have kids competing and stuff like that in another video. But when it comes to competition, you're left with this kind of difficulty in that you're competing to beat your own best times. And, you know, we've got PRs and things like that to show that you've actually done better than you ever did before. But in addition to that, we're also competing against other people, and you don't actually have that much control over what kind of games somebody else brings to the table. When it comes to improving dopamine levels, you got to be really smart about deciding what are your goals for a competition going to be. Most of the time, you're going to want to be setting personal goals rather than rank-based goals. So saying, I want to get into a final is great, but unless you know that you're already one of the best in the world at this moment, the chances of being able to guarantee something like that are slim to none. So it doesn't really make sense to make that a goal that's going to release a ton of dopamine into your system unless you know that you're already there. Setting something like a PR might be a more healthy way to do it. Or if you're going to go after records, start figuring out which ones you actually have a good chance of achieving. So for me, I am really into multi-blind. It is my favorite event to do. And I think that actually was probably just by chance. I think if the national record for Ireland had been less achievable at the time I was starting competitions, I probably would have picked a different thing. Blindfolded might have become my thing, or maybe I would have just stuck with the regular 3x3 or something like that. But just the fact that this thing was very much within my grasp gave me a hell of a lot more motivation to go and achieve it than if it was miles off. So looking at competing, it might be worth finding just random individuals to like nemesize or whatever. Choose those people to see, can I overtake them in the rankings? Can I jump up one place in the rankings rather than can I make it to the finals in the next competition? So I'll wrap it up for now because I will definitely make a more fluid version of this in the future. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think, if you agree or disagree. Do you find that this has rung true to you, that you've actually stuck with the things where you found you were kind of good at it and just spent more time in that zone of almost succeeding? Or are you one of the people that just suffers through life and can just brush off failure like it's nothing and just kind of plow through that? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you hopefully next week.